Many people think that using RFID chips in cards and even microchip implants in their arms or hands does not amount to accepting the mark of the beast, because it does not fulfill all the technical details of the prophecy. Others say that the microchip implants cannot be the mark of the beast because the mark is something spiritual, something that cannot be manifested physically, but is instead something symbolic. Some people argue that the mark of the beast has to do with what day of the week you rest or worship God, that the seal of God for his chosen ones is to rest on Saturdays, whereas the mark of the beast will be a law that demands that everyone in the whole world worship God on Sundays. In this video, we're going to deal with these issues and clarify if the present microchips are the actual mark of the beast, what our attitude should be towards them, and whether the mark has anything to do with worshipping God on Sundays. Brother Jack here. Many people point to the differences between the mark of the beast prophecy and the RFID microchip technology we currently have available to argue that there is no danger in using the technology. It is true that we do not yet have something that gives an exact and complete fulfillment of the prophecy. Some people are already implanting themselves with microchips to buy and sell, but most microchip implants have been for medical purposes. In many cases, they are not implanting them in their right hand. They are mostly being implanted in the upper part of the arm or in the left hand. Also, they are not obligatory for buying and selling, nor have they been implemented on a global scale like the prophecy says. Nevertheless, each step of these technologies represent precursors to the mark of the beast, and many people focus on the differences between the precursors and the final prophecy of the mark of the beast, and use such technical differences to disregard our warnings. But the mark of the beast will not come all of a sudden from one day to the next. There is and will be a great variety of precursors to the mark. One of the precursors most common today are RFID chipped cards. For example, a football club in the United Kingdom no longer accepts cash to go and see a match. You need to have a chipped card. Another football club in Argentina has gone an extra step and has recently introduced the idea of implanting RFID microchips in the upper arm that can be used for entering the grounds. Many shops everywhere are now promoting or requiring RFID chipped cards to access special discounts. And you can no longer travel using public transport in many places without an RFID chipped card. All of this is part of the conditioning that the system needs to implement before the final mark of the beast comes in. The world's population must get used to making cashless transactions and be comfortable with having all their data registered and accessible to the system, and to enjoy and depend on the commodities that the technology offers before the whole world will be ready to accept an implantable microchip in the hand or forehead, without which they will not be able to buy or sell. Those who want to promote this transaction system based on microchip implants know that resistance to such a plan mostly comes from people who know of the mark of the beast prophecy. So the system keeps wearing down that resistance, little by little, through the use of these precursors. Technically, these precursors are not the mark of the beast, and so many people do not take seriously the warnings we are giving with regard to these precursors, because they think that as long as it's not the final mark of the beast, they do not need to worry about using the technology. People keep getting ever closer to the mark itself, thinking that there is no danger. But the precursors give us the opportunity to see how difficult it'll be for us to live completely out of the system without the mark of the beast. If we keep giving in and continually get used to using the precursors, they're going to take us closer and closer to the mark itself until accepting the mark of the beast just becomes one more tiny step above what we are already used to. That's why it's important to note how the population of the world is conditioned with this technology. Young people already grow up accepting that it is the norm, and it is getting harder to question what is happening without being seen as antiquated and extremists. However, many of us are drawing the line now, even with some of these precursors, so that we can experience some of the inconvenience and challenges that we will face later when the final mark of the beast is implemented. For example, in Argentina, an RFID chipped card called the SUBE was introduced a few years ago for public transport. At first it was totally optional, but it was clear where the system wanted to lure people to. So a few conscious Christians there decided to look for alternatives. As a result, they had to get used to the inconvenience of paying with cash, which took longer than using the chipped card. Later, they had to pay a higher price for their bus ticket as a fine for not using the SUBE card. Later, the SUBE card became obligatory for travelling on buses, so they had to look for alternatives, like riding bicycles a lot more. All of this helped them to see how inconvenient it would be to not have the mark, and the changes that they needed to make right now. The implementation of the SUBE card in Argentina is a good example of how different countries around the world use campaigns, rewards, and punishments to nudge people towards accepting a new system. Watch our video, The Mark of the Beast Step-by-Step Conditioning, which shows a clear example of social manipulation towards the Mark of the Beast. In almost each area of commercial transactions and logistics, RFID chipped cards are being implemented. Soon, they'll put RFID chips in all driver's licenses and ID cards. It is getting harder and harder to buy things, especially on the internet, without some kind of chipped credit or debit card. And many banks now require that you use an RFID chipped card to withdraw your funds. All of this is inconvenient for those of us who are trying to distance ourselves from this technology, but it helps to prepare us spiritually for rejecting the final mark of the beast. It is much easier to adjust slowly to such inconveniences than to wait till the last minute. But talking about the mark of the beast is not much use if we aren't going to do something right now to prepare ourselves spiritually, or if we keep playing with the limits to see how close we can get to the mark. Someone wrote to us this week saying that the pastor of their church had explained that the RFID implantable microchips are not the mark of the beast, and so they could be accepted. This is a common argument, especially with people who believe that the dividing line between good and evil is drawn with regard to whether you go to church on Saturday or Sunday. For such people, God will save those who gather on Saturdays, while the people who gather on Sundays will be condemned for eternity because they chose the wrong day to worship God. But that has nothing to do with the Mark of the Beast prophecy. To start with, it is not a sin to worship God on Sundays. In fact, we should worship Him every day. Also, the Mark of the Beast prophecy does not mention anything about a day of the week. Instead, it specifies that the mark has everything to do with buying and selling. And this is because Jesus did not say that we had to choose between serving God on Saturdays or serving Him on Sundays. Rather, He taught that we must serve God every day, and that the dividing line is between those who serve God and those who serve money and all that it can buy. Don't fall for the illusion that you can accept the implantable microchip without consequences, as long as you keep going to a religious building on Saturdays. The Mark of the Beast prophecy clearly says that it will be placed in the hand or in the forehead of all people, and many people want to spiritualize that by saying that it has to do with our thoughts and actions and not with something literal. So, what do we do with the fact that the implantable microchips do give the prophecy a literal and physical fulfillment? Should we disregard these chips that can be literally implanted in the hand and even in the brain, and that can literally be used for buying and selling? Centuries ago, when this technology was not available, it was understandable that people looked for a spiritual interpretation of the prophecy. since they could not imagine how the prophecy could be fulfilled literally. But now that the infrastructure and technology is being developed to give the prophecy a literal fulfillment, we cannot ignore this literal interpretation, especially when it fits in perfectly with everything that Jesus taught about money and materialism. I'm warning you now that a day will come very soon when you'll not be able to buy or sell without a mark in your right hand or in your forehead. And it is very probable that this will manifest itself literally through the use of a microchip implant. I'm saying that you need to prepare yourself now and not wait until the last minute. But sadly, many people who watch these kinds of videos do not do anything to put into practice the spiritual lessons that I'm communicating on this channel. It's like when Jesus said whoever hears his teachings and does not practice them is building on sand, and when the storm comes, that person's house will be completely destroyed. Such people agree with me with their lips, but they do not do anything to take it seriously by starting to obey the teachings of Jesus right now. If it is only theory and no practice, I doubt they'll have enough courage and moral strength to resist the temptation to accept the mark of the beast. So please do not make the same mistake. Take it seriously. Take Jesus seriously. Start fixing your relationship with God today, before the final trial takes you by surprise. Remember that in the parable of the 10 virgins that Jesus taught about the end times, 5 were prepared and 5 were not. But when the hour of testing came, there was not enough time for the 5 who had prepared to help the ones who had been lazy and not prepared. If you are interested in leaving the system and being a part of a team of disciples that is already working full-time for God, write to me via the address on screen. I hope to hear from you.